Have you ever wondered what's really behind the terrifying myth of the Minotaur? This video explores the surprising historical context and cultural significance of this mythical creature, revealing the hidden truth behind the monster and the lessons it teaches about humanity. Picture this: you're standing in front of a vast, sun-bleached stone maze. The air smells like dust and salt. Wind whistles faintly through cracked walls, and somewhere, far inside the twists and turns of that ancient puzzle, a low, hungry growl echoes. It's probably just your stomach, or it's the Minotaur, but more likely, it's boredom knocking at the door. Because honestly, once you peel back the dramatic masks and thunderous musical scores that usually accompany stories like this one, you're left with a strange, messy, overly symbolic tale of ancient political grudges, weird religious rituals, and a dude who forgot to change his sails. You probably won't be able to stay awake through this story. That's kind of the point. So before you jump into this boring mythology, please take a moment to like my videos and subscribe to my channel, but only if you actually enjoy and feel comfortable with the stories I tell here. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I like imagining all of us drifting off together, scattered across the world. Now lie down and relax. Turn off the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's start our boring journey together tonight. You trudge across the marble-paved memory of ancient Crete, where the Minotaur's story first took shape. Not in fireside tales, but likely in political propaganda and imported legends. The myth is usually framed as a dark and thrilling warning against arrogance, monstrosity, or taking unmarked paths into underground cattle enclosures. But its roots are tangled. At the center of it all is a labyrinth. Not a modern hedge maze or a video game dungeon, but something older and far less coherent. The word labyrinth itself probably comes from labris, a double-headed axe used in Minoan religious rituals. Not particularly sleepy, right? But imagine walking through corridors lined with flickering torches, frescoes of dancing bulls, and sacred axes hanging like silent judges. It's kind of hypnotic if you don't mind the mild existential dread. Now, if you're already yawning, good. That means it's working. But back to the beginning. According to the Greeks, there was once a fearsome creature, the Minotaur, trapped in a sprawling maze beneath the palace of Knossos. He had the body of a man, the head of a bull, and the appetite of, well, a metaphor. This half-human, half-animal thing was said to be born of divine trickery and royal shame, imprisoned because no one quite knew what else to do with him. Historians still argue whether the idea of a labyrinth came first, or whether it was stitched onto the myth later like a decorative afterthought. Some suggest the Greeks didn't even picture a literal maze at first, just a confusing structure, maybe the actual ruins of Knossos, with its oddly winding hallways and disappearing doors. Others insist that the labyrinth was always symbolic. A tangled mind, a disorienting fate, or the bureaucracy of Athenian taxes. Whichever way you slice it, the myth of the labyrinth is more confusing than thrilling. And the way it's told, even more so. No two versions of the tale agree on the same details. Some say there were 9 youths and 9 maidens sacrificed to the Minotaur every 9 years. Others say it was 7 each every 7 years. Or maybe just once. Or maybe never. The whole story is a mythological smoothie, equal parts fear, memory, ritual, and recycled storytelling. And yet, it keeps popping up in places you wouldn't expect. Sigmund Freud saw the Minotaur as a symbol of our inner wildness. Ancient scholars saw it as a moral lesson. Tourists in Crete just see it as a nice place to buy a postcard. In all versions, though, the labyrinth is central. And more than that, it's boringly central. because it's not exciting to imagine wandering endlessly in the dark, unsure of your path, hearing distant hoofbeats that may or may not be your doom. It's exhausting. It's uncomfortable. It's exactly the kind of thing that puts you to sleep. A mainstream fact here: the Palace of Knossos in Crete, long associated with the Labyrinth, was a real place, excavated in the early 20th century by British archaeologist Arthur Evans. He was so excited to find something he thought matched the myth. He basically rebuilt parts of the ruins in bright concrete and painted murals based more on his imagination than evidence. Thanks, Arthur. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe the myth was actually inspired by sacred bull rituals in ancient Crete, where people would leap over bulls in acrobatic performances that likely involved way too much danger and not enough health insurance. More on that later. Meanwhile, fringe theorists have argued that the Minotaur wasn't a monster at all, but maybe a priest in a horned mask, or even a metaphor for an older, conquered culture remembered only as monstrous. Maybe the labyrinth wasn't underground at all, but a ceremonial dance path. Or maybe the entire story is just what happens when 3 centuries of oral tradition crash into wine. You wander the corridors of thought, half awake, maybe wondering how much of this story you've already forgotten. That's okay. The Minotaur will still be waiting. The labyrinth never ends. But it doesn't need to make sense either, because that's the best part of boring myths. They're not about what's true. They're about what lingers when the lights are off and your mind drifts. You're still wandering through that ancient maze, but now your sandals crunch against dry stone as you slowly approach the shadowy figure of a king. Not just any king, but King Minos of Crete, a man whose personality was about as charming as a wet sandal and just as flexible. Minos is one of those mythological figures who shows up in half a dozen other myths, usually making impossible demands or sulking when things don't go his way. His story is weirdly foundational to the Minotaur myth, though, so you'll have to suffer through his royal drama before we get back to the horned beast. Now, in the version you're half sleepily imagining, Minos wasn't just a ruler, he was a son of Zeus. Yes, that's Zeus, the serial shapeshifter, the god of thunder and questionable decisions. So Minos had divine blood, which meant he could yell louder than other kings and be taken more seriously when demanding things like tribute, sacrifice, and, at one point, a snow-white bull. But we're not there yet. Let's rewind to the part where Minos becomes king. Supposedly, when the previous king of Crete died, Minos claimed the throne by saying the gods had chosen him, a bold political strategy that's somehow still in fashion. To prove this divine endorsement, he prayed to Poseidon, the sea god, to send a sign, a bull rising from the waves. And Poseidon actually delivered. A beautiful, shimmering white bull emerged from the ocean like some mythological beauty pageant contestant, ready to be sacrificed in honor of the gods. Except Minos didn't sacrifice it. Nope. He took one look at that glistening, God-sent creature and said, "Actually, I think I'll keep it." Historians still argue whether this entire event was a moral tale about defying the gods, or just a strangely specific metaphor for mismanaging resources. Either way, Poseidon was not amused. And this is where the myth takes its first sharp turn into wait, what? territory. Poseidon, being the creatively petty god he was, decided that Minos' wife, Queen Pasiphae, should fall hopelessly, unexplainably in love with the bull. Now it's late. You're lying down. Maybe you're starting to drift a little. That's good, because this part of the story is best experienced through a veil of semi-consciousness. Let's just say that Pasiphae's affection for the bull led to a union, one that required the services of a certain inventor named Daedalus. He built a wooden cow, And look, it's just not bedtime friendly. What matters is that the result of this whole awkward divine punishment was the birth of the Minotaur. But let's stay focused on Minos for now. He was a complicated figure in mythology, both feared and revered. He was said to have once sailed around the Aegean Sea, asserting Cretan dominance over nearby islands like some ancient version of franchise expansion. He also demanded regular tribute from Athens, allegedly to avenge the death of his son Androgeos. Some versions say the Athenians murdered the boy out of jealousy because he was too good at sports. Others say he was killed by a bull during games held in his honor. Either way, Minos responded the way most mythological kings do, with threats and weird long-term arrangements. The tribute system, sending young Athenians to Crete to be fed to the Minotaur, was born from this vendetta. It's unclear whether such a system could have existed in any historical sense, but hey, ancient myths don't really concern themselves with logistics. Still, fringe scholars speculate that the story might be a reflection of real Cretan dominance over mainland Greece during the height of the Minoan civilization. Like maybe the Athenians didn't literally send children to die in mazes, but rather were forced into some kind of economic or cultural submission. But that's all speculative. What we do know is that Minos had a reputation for being cruelly just. Think of someone who follows the rules to such a degree that it becomes oppressive. Even after death, he became one of the 3 judges of the underworld in Greek mythology, alongside Rhadamanthus and Aeacus. So yes, even dead, he couldn't stop judging people. Quirky side note, the name Minos might not even be a name. It could be a title, like Pharaoh or Caesar. That means there may have been many Minoses, which kind of breaks the whole narrative if you're trying to imagine a single drama king behind the myth. Like showing up to the theater expecting Hamlet and getting Various Bureaucrats, Volume 3. You sigh softly. All this politicking, all this divine bull nonsense. And it's still only the beginning of the tale. But it's oddly soothing, this slow tangle of kings and curses and questionable choices. You're walking through a historical fog, where timelines blur and names dissolve like warm wax. You feel yourself starting to fade, maybe picturing Minos standing on a marble balcony, arms crossed, frowning at his palace staff while thunder rumbles in the distance. He's not a sympathetic character, but he is consistent, proud, entitled, and always trying to control what shouldn't be controlled. The Minotaur may be the symbol, but Minos? He's the system, the rigidity, the architecture behind the monster. And somewhere, deep under his palace, that creature is already waiting. But not quite yet. You still have more boring royalty to wade through, more frescoes to stare at, more long, spiraling passages to trace with your half-closed eyes. Let's keep walking. You wander deeper now, past silent columns and flaking walls painted with long-forgotten gods. The air is thicker here, like you're walking through the breath of history itself. Somewhere above, the sound of waves might be crashing, but down here, it's just you and the strange, sticky silence of old divine grudges. Because we've arrived at the part of the myth where Poseidon, god of the sea, reveals just how wildly specific his revenge style can be. You probably remember Poseidon for his trident, his storms, his whole ocean aesthetic. But he was also deeply theatrical. When offended, he didn't just flood your village, he aimed for long-lasting discomfort. In King Minos' case, this meant orchestrating one of the most famously uncomfortable love stories in all of Greek mythology. And that's saying something. Remember that bull Minos refused to sacrifice? The one Poseidon sent as a divine sign? Well, Poseidon wanted it back in a metaphorical sense. Since Minos kept it out of greed, Poseidon decided the only logical punishment was to make Minos' wife, Queen Pasiphae, fall madly, obsessively in love with it. You're allowed to blink slowly at that. It's a strange choice. Even the gods must have been like, Poseidon? You okay, buddy? But that's Greek mythology for you. The gods are always one minor offense away from turning your love life into a surreal, barnyard tragedy. So Pasiphae becomes entranced. Not just impressed or intrigued, but completely overwhelmed with desire. Now, the myth isn't particularly clear on how this love manifests beyond being powerful and all-consuming. It doesn't need to be. The point is, she can't let it go. It's magical, inexplicable, and deeply inconvenient for everyone involved. That's where Daedalus comes in. Yes, that Daedalus, the inventor, the craftsman, the one with a flair for overly complicated solutions. Later, he'll be known for building wings that melt and getting stuck in a tower with his son. But right now, he's the royal engineer, and he's about to be given the strangest job of his entire career. Pasiphae, desperate and completely under divine influence, asks Daedalus for help. And because this is mythology, and employment options are limited in palace life, he agrees. Historians still argue whether Daedalus helped willingly or under royal command, or whether this part of the myth was tacked on later to give a famous inventor something weird to do. Either way, he designs and builds a hollow wooden cow. That's right, a cow costume large enough for a queen. You're welcome for that sleepy visual. You can almost see it now. Daedalus muttering to himself, hammering together a life-sized bovine shell while trying very hard not to think about its intended purpose. The wood smells like pine. The palace staff walks by slowly, pretending not to notice. Nobody says anything. This is just another Tuesday in the royal workshop. And this, dear dreamer, is how the Minotaur is born. Half man, half bull. A creature with the face of a beast and the body of a confused teenager. The myths are vague about his exact appearance. Some say he had cloven hooves and fur-covered limbs. Others imagine him as more human, with just a horned head. What's consistent is that he's terrifying, unnatural, and instantly seen as a problem. Minos, perhaps rightly, panics. And what do you do when your wife gives birth to a divine punishment with horns? You hide it underground. Obviously. Here's where Daedalus steps back in. He's told to build something to contain the creature, something it can never escape, something twisting, inescapable, and maybe metaphorical. So Daedalus constructs the Labyrinth. Quirky side fact? Some archaeologists believe the idea of a labyrinth was inspired by the Palace of Knossos itself, which had so many rooms, corridors, and storage chambers that even the staff probably got lost looking for the break room. It wasn't a literal maze, but if you've ever wandered through a badly labeled museum, you get the idea. So the Minotaur grows up in darkness, pacing a stone maze that echoes with its own footsteps. The myths don't say much about its daily life, only that it was eventually fed a regular offering of human flesh, specifically young Athenians sent as tribute. But before that begins, imagine the creature alone. Part beast, part boy, surrounded by walls no one else can navigate. There's something sad in that image, isn't there? A monster born not out of evil, but divine spite. Locked away not because it wanted to harm, but because it simply was. Historians still debate whether the Minotaur represents literal ritual sacrifice, or just an older Cretan tradition demonized by Greek authors. Some fringe theories even argue that there was never a monster, just a symbolic scapegoat, or a captured enemy leader reimagined through centuries of legend. Maybe the Minotaur was memory, painted over in layers of fear and drama. You pause. A yawn drifts up like fog. The story feels heavier now, slower. The torchlight in your mind dims just slightly. This part of the myth isn't exciting. It's uncomfortable, tangled, surreal, but it's rich with meaning. Because the Minotaur isn't just a monster in a maze. He's what happens when humans try to hide their guilt. When gods meddle with mortals. When kings make promises and break them. And somewhere down the corridor, the hoofbeats begin again. Not loud, just soft, rhythmic, distant. But they're getting closer. The maze breathes around you, if a structure made of stone and myth can breathe at all. The air is stale, the silence strangely alive, and somewhere in its center paces a being who shouldn't exist. You take another slow step, not toward him, but toward understanding what exactly he is. Because the birth of the Minotaur may be behind you, but his presence still fills the corridors like thick, ancient incense. Let's look at this creature now. Half man, half bull. The Minotaur is rarely given a name beyond that title, which literally means bull of Minos. That's all he gets. Not a personal name, not an identity of his own. Just a monstrous label like a warning sign nailed to a door. In most versions of the myth, he's silent. No dialogue. No thoughts. Just a monstrous appetite and the stomping of hooves echoing off cold stone walls. But you're not really convinced, are you? That a creature with human intelligence and animal instincts just paced in the dark, waiting for teenagers to wander in? Even the ancient Greeks weren't totally sure. Some writers, like Plutarch, suggested the Minotaur might not have been a literal beast at all. Maybe he was a deformed child. Maybe a priest in ceremonial garb. Maybe a mythologized memory of an older Cretan god who didn't fit neatly into the Olympian family tree and had to be rewritten as monstrous to be forgotten. Historians still argue whether the Minotaur was ever meant to be taken literally, or if he was simply a symbolic dumping ground for everything ancient Athens wanted to reject. Foreignness, savagery, excess. The horns, the appetite, the silence. It all adds up to something you're not supposed to identify with. Yet here you are, imagining him pacing in solitude. Not roaring, just waiting. Quirky aside, in a few medieval versions of the myth, centuries after the Greeks and Romans were done with it, the Minotaur was described as intelligent, sorrowful, even articulate. In one rare retelling, he gives Theseus riddles. In another, he begs for mercy. You won't find that in your high school textbook, but let's drift back to the better-known version. In that one, Minos locks the Minotaur deep in the labyrinth not long after his birth. No trial. No negotiation. No real effort to raise him. He's not just unwanted, he's hidden. Buried beneath the palace like a secret nobody wants to admit exists. And then comes the solution. Feed it. Not with sheep or cattle, those would be too easy. Too clean. No, the creature receives a steady diet of human tributes. Youths specifically. From Athens specifically. Minos demands that every few years, the Athenians send 7 boys and 7 girls to Crete. Why? To feed the Minotaur, of course. The exact frequency of this tribute varies depending on which ancient author you consult. 7 years, 9 years. Annually. Some say it happened only once. Others say it was a recurring punishment. The details don't matter nearly as much as the feeling of it. Dread, helplessness, routine sacrifice. Athens, you'll recall, wasn't exactly the proud, democratic cradle of civilization at this point. It was still figuring things out. According to the myth, this gruesome tribute was punishment for the death of Minos' son, Androgeos. Depending on the version, Androgeos was either killed in a rigged sporting event or sent on a suicide mission by a jealous Athenian king. Either way, Minos demanded blood in return. So the tributes begin. Imagine being chosen. You're a teenager. You've been dressed in fine clothes, told you're serving your city, and then herded onto a ship bound for Crete. When you arrive, there's no ceremony.
No explanation.
Just the looming palace, the carved entrance to the labyrinth, and the sound of hooves in the dark. You feel your breath slow as you picture it. The teens are led one by one into the maze. There's no map, no way out, just endless stone corridors and a creature who, by this point, probably knows every turn like the back of his, hoof. It's never said how the Minotaur kills his victims. Does he gore them? Crush them? Simply let them starve while they wander? No one really knows. That's part of the dread. The myth leaves out the details, letting your sleepy imagination fill them in with shadows. And what of the Minotaur himself? Does he wait patiently? Does he chase? Does he care? There's something deeply unspoken in these myths, and it's that the Minotaur might not have been a villain. He might have been just as trapped as the youths he killed, locked away for his entire life, hated from birth, fed only when victims were dragged to him like groceries. That's not a monster. That's a prisoner with a feeding schedule. It makes you wonder, was the labyrinth a cage for the Minotaur, or a test for the humans who entered it? Either way, the Minotaur becomes a symbol, not just of monstrosity, but of secrets, of the part of yourself you'd rather lock away and never confront, the hunger that shames you, the wildness you pretend not to have. And the longer you walk these twisting narrative hallways, the more you start to see it. The Minotaur isn't chasing you. He is you. But don't worry, that's way too deep for this hour of the night. Let your thoughts settle. You don't need to solve the maze. Just wander in it a while longer. The Minotaur's still pacing, but now he doesn't seem quite so frightening. Just lonely. The stone beneath your feet feels warmer now, as if centuries of footsteps have left behind a residual heat. You follow a faint line of torchlight deeper into the labyrinth story, not toward the monster this time, but toward the man who made the maze, Daedalus. His name might not ring out like Zeus or Hercules, but Daedalus is quietly one of the most influential inventors in Greek mythology. He's the architect, the engineer, the fixer called in when someone has a royal problem with no tasteful solution. And in this story, he's the one asked to solve the problem of a queen's shame and a king's monstrous stepchild. You already know Daedalus built the hollow cow for Pasiphae. That's the bit people remember with a wince. But what came after that is just as strange and a lot more tragic, especially if you're trying to fall asleep and enjoy a little melancholic design theory. After the Minotaur was born, Minos turned to Daedalus again and said, "Build me something that can hold it." And Daedalus, never one to turn down a challenge or possibly a paycheck, got to work. Now, here's where myth and archaeology do a little awkward dance. Because there's a real place in Crete, the Palace of Knossos. Its ruins are complex, sprawling, and filled with confusing corridors, storage rooms, and stairs that go nowhere. Some scholars believe it was the inspiration for the Labyrinth, or even that it was the Labyrinth just described through the haze of centuries of retelling. Mainstream fact: the Palace of Knossos was excavated in the early 20th century by Sir Arthur Evans, who became so enamored with the idea that Knossos was the labyrinth, he started reconstructing it based on hunches and a big love for concrete. The result? A half-real, half-imagined version of the ancient past, kind of like the myth itself. But back in the story, Daedalus builds his masterpiece, the labyrinth. It's never described in detail by the ancient writers. No floor plans, No blueprints, just the idea of a place so complex. Once you entered, you could never find your way back out. A self-swallowing building. A puzzle that forgot it had an answer. Fringe interpretations go a little wild here. Some argue the labyrinth wasn't a literal structure at all, but a ceremonial dance. Others think it was a cave complex, or a metaphor for the brain, or for the human condition, or for your cluttered sock drawer. But whatever it was, it worked. The Minotaur was hidden. Problem solved, right? Not quite, because Daedalus, poor genius that he was, soon discovered the real trap wasn't the maze. It was Minos, the king, being exactly as paranoid as you'd expect from someone who imprisoned his wife's hybrid child, decided Daedalus knew too much. He feared the architect might reveal the labyrinth's secrets to others. So what does Minos do? He locks Daedalus and his son, Icarus, in a tower. Yes, the inventor of the labyrinth ends up in his own personal trap. You can almost see him, pacing back and forth in a high stone room, scribbling ideas in the dust while his teenage son complains about the view and asks if they're going to die. It's almost funny, if it weren't so bleak. Now, you might be wondering, how does this connect to the Minotaur story? It doesn't. Not directly, but it matters, because the labyrinth wasn't just a prison for the monster. It became a symbol of how everyone connected to this myth ends up trapped. The queen in her desire, the king in his pride, the builder in his knowledge, and even the hero eventually in his memory. But let's not get ahead. Quirky tidbit time. Daedalus and Icarus escape the tower not by picking the lock or charming the guards, but by building wings, feathers and wax. The world's most famous father-son flight disaster. You probably know the story. Icarus flies too close to the sun, the wax melts, he falls into the sea. Cue the ancient Greek equivalent of a sad flute solo. But before that flight, Daedalus does something important. He tells Ariadne, Minos' daughter, how to navigate the labyrinth. A single piece of advice: use a thread. This is where the plan begins to unravel, literally. Historians still argue whether Daedalus' role in giving away the labyrinth's secret was a later addition, or an older tradition forgotten by early versions. But narratively, it fits. He created the maze and then, in the end, offered the only way out. There's something poetic in that, isn't there? Imagine Daedalus, old and tired, leaning over a map he drew in memory, whispering to Ariadne in the shadows, telling her that the key to defeating the monster isn't strength or speed. It's something as simple, as boring, as patient as string. That single thread will change the course of the story. But for now, you're still inside the maze and the Minotaur is still pacing. You pause at a corner. The walls seem to breathe again. Somewhere, Daedalus is hammering together wings. Somewhere else, Icarus is staring at the sun. And beneath it all, in the very center, the beast waits. Not just for Theseus, for you. But you're not afraid. You're just sleepy. The hooves are distant again. The maze is still growing. And the inventor's footsteps fade behind you as you follow the thread forward into the next part of this dream. You follow the thread now, not literally, not yet, but in your mind, where stories weave and spool like loose yarn in the dark. You're stepping away from Crete for a moment, letting the maze wind behind you while you sail across the glittering Aegean to Athens. It's calmer here, breezier, but also a little heavier, because this is where the tribute begins. Imagine Athens, still young in mythic time, its temples not yet weathered, its future glory just a rumor whispered among stoneworkers and poets. It's a city full of promise and insecurity. and when it crosses King Minos of Crete, pays. As the myth goes, Minos' son, Androgeos, was killed while visiting Athens. The stories vary wildly, of course. In one version, the Athenian king sends Androgeos to fight a dangerous bull in Marathon, hoping he wouldn't survive. In another, Athenian athletes grow jealous of how unbeatable the Cretan prince is and murder him in a sort of mythological locker room incident. Whichever tale you believe, the result is the same. Androgeos dies and Minos, grieving, vengeful, and not known for his emotional balance, launches a war against Athens. Here comes the part where myth and propaganda start to blur. The Athenians are said to have lost the war, or at least come to terms under pressure. And the cost? Every few years, again, the exact number shifts with the storyteller's mood. Athens must send a tribute of young men and women to Crete, specifically to be fed to the Minotaur. Mainstream fact: no historical record confirms such a tribute system. Shocking, right? But the story may reflect something symbolic, like political submission or a cultural inferiority complex toward the more advanced Minoan civilization. Crete, after all, had indoor plumbing while Athens was still figuring out columns. Still, in the myth, the arrangement is treated as a cruel inevitability. Every cycle, 7 boys and 7 girls, chosen from noble families, are packed off to Crete like a tragic field trip. No one ever returns. You picture it in your half-sleep. The ship departing from Piraeus harbor, black sails catching the wind. Parents watching from the dock, faces carved in fear and formality. The youths standing silently, dressed in their finest, as though pageantry could shield them from what waits. It's a ritual, and rituals are always strange in mythology. They're both terrifying and numbing. Do the chosen ones cry? Or are they taught not to? Do they know what the labyrinth is? Or do they imagine something worse? Fringe theories suggest the tribute system may be an allegory for human sacrifice in ancient rites, long since abandoned but still echoing in myth. Others propose that the number 7 isn't literal but sacred, symbolic. It might even reflect an earlier myth about the moon, or seasonal change, or grain offerings. But here, in the story you're dreaming through, the tribute is real. The ship arrives in Crete, and the youths are led to the palace. Maybe they walk through Knossos, marveling at the vibrant frescoes, the red columns, the huge jars lining storage rooms. They might think briefly that it's all a mistake, that a place so beautiful couldn't hide something so dark. But then they see the entrance, the labyrinth yawning open like a mouth in the stone. There are no goodbyes after that. Enter Theseus. He's the prince of Athens, son of King Aegeus. Or maybe he's the son of Poseidon. Or both, because in Greek myths, parentage is a choose-your-own-adventure. Theseus is strong, proud, and very tired of watching his city send its best and brightest to Crete like sacrificial produce. So, when the time comes for the next tribute, he volunteers. You can almost hear his dramatic speech now. Something about honor, justice, defeating monsters, etc. Everyone claps, or cries, or both. Depends on the version. But behind the boldness is a quiet desperation. Theseus wants to change something, end a cycle, rewrite the myth, and of course make a name for himself while he's at it. Let's not pretend Greek heroes were known for humility. Mainstream fact: Theseus was one of Athens' great founding heroes, treated in later centuries like a symbol of Athenian virtue and cleverness. But the earliest versions of his myth paint him as a bit rough around the edges, more brawler than philosopher. And here's a quirky detail. On the way to Crete, Theseus promises his father he'll return with white sails if he's successful. If he fails, the ship will keep its black ones. It seems like a smart system. If he remembers. Spoiler, he doesn't. But that's a tale for later. Right now, Theseus boards the ship with the others, sails across the sea, and arrives in Crete. Just another tribute, except with the stubborn spark of heroism glowing behind his eyes. What happens next depends on who's telling the story. Some say Minos instantly sees something in him. Others say the palace guards don't even notice. But Ariadne, Minos' daughter, definitely notices. Love at first sight, divine influence, rebellion in the air, maybe all of the above. But she sees Theseus and decides she wants to help him. You drift a little deeper now, the maze humming in the background of your thoughts. The tribute system is cruel, but it's neat, predictable. An old rhythm that makes sense to people who've given up on questioning the shape of the world. Theseus is here to break it, but first, he'll need a ball of thread. The corridor narrows now. Not literally. You're still in your bed, drifting with half-closed eyes. But the story begins to pull tighter around you, coiling toward its center. You've met the monster. You've met the inventor. Now it's time to spend a little too much time with the so-called hero of the story, Theseus.
Theseus.
Brave? Yes. Clever? Sometimes. Likeable? It depends who's telling the tale. He's one of those heroes who looks great in sculpture but makes a few too many oopsies for comfort. And yet, he's the one chosen to go into the labyrinth and kill the Minotaur. So you have to at least pretend to root for him. Let's set the scene. Theseus arrives in Crete aboard the tribute ship, disguised among the doomed Athenian youths. In some versions, he declares his identity boldly. In others, he keeps it secret until the right moment. Either way, it doesn't take long for someone to take notice. That someone is Ariadne, daughter of King Minos. But we'll get to her shortly. First, let's consider Theseus as he enters the myth. He's already built a reputation back home. By this point in the timeline, he's cleared the road to Athens of robbers, wrestled some sketchy demigods, and solved at least one minor murder mystery. He's very busy, and he's not exactly known for subtlety. His solutions tend to involve punching, stabbing, or throwing people off cliffs. It's a brand. Mainstream fact, Theseus was eventually folded into Athens' origin story to give the city a founding hero that could compete with Heracles and Perseus. But his myth is older than that, rougher, more regional. Less about wisdom and more about taking action when action seems vaguely heroic. So when he volunteers to go to Crete, it's a statement. He's not just trying to slay a monster. He's trying to be the kind of man who slays monsters. Fringe theory time. Some scholars think Theseus didn't slay anything at all. That the whole Minotaur tale was a myth cooked up later to glorify Athens and diminish the power of old Crete. A clever bit of historical revisionism disguised as a bedtime story. Because why admit your ancestors paid tribute to another island when you could say, "Oh no, we sent our prince there, and he ended the whole thing with a sword and a glare"? Still, in the version we're following tonight, Theseus is very real, and very much about to meet Ariadne. Now, Ariadne is complicated. Princess of Crete, daughter of Minos and Pasiphae, sister, technically, to the Minotaur, though you can imagine she never really got to bond with him over board games or dinner. She lives above the maze, in a palace of twisting halls and family secrets. When she sees Theseus, something sparks. Maybe it's love. Maybe it's rebellion. Maybe it's just boredom with royal life. In any case, she decides to help him survive the labyrinth. This is her story's hinge, helping the hero escape the monster her family created. And how does she help? With a ball of thread. Quirky tidbit. The Greek word used for this ball of string is clue, which is where we get the modern word clue, as in a way to find your way through confusion. You're welcome. So Ariadne gives Theseus a sword and a spool of thread. Not magic, not a divine weapon, just practical tools, the way bored daughters of dysfunctional monarchs sometimes fix impossible problems. Theseus ties one end of the thread at the entrance of the labyrinth. The rest he carries in his hand. That's simple, that brilliant, because it's not strength that defeats the maze, it's memory, path, promise. You almost admire him, except Theseus is, well, Theseus. He'll go in. He'll face the Minotaur. He'll kill it, probably. He'll emerge with a story and a girlfriend. But in time, he'll also do what he always does. Forget something important. Because while he's brave, Theseus is also forgetful, distracted, human. And humanity, as you've probably gathered by now, is the real subject of this myth. Not monsters, not gods, but what we do when we face darkness, what we forget, what we leave behind. But you're getting ahead again. For now, Theseus stands at the threshold of the maze. Thread in one hand, sword in the other. Somewhere inside waits the Minotaur, breathing slowly, pacing in familiar circles. And above, Ariadne watches from her balcony, breath held, hoping that for once, love and strategy will win. Historians still argue whether Ariadne was originally the main character of this myth. Some early versions give her far more agency, casting her not as a sidekick but as the labyrinth's true master. After all, she holds the thread. Without her, Theseus is just another boy with a short life expectancy. But the myths changed. As they always do, the focus shifted, the thread tightened, and now you follow it, slowly, as Theseus steps into the darkness. Each twist in the tunnel echoes with your breath. The stones feel soft beneath your feet. The torchlight flickers. A thread trails behind you, the only connection to the world outside. You don't know where the monster is, but you know it's not far. You step forward with Theseus now, into the quiet of the labyrinth. The air cools immediately, the stones swallowing the sea breeze like a door slamming behind you. There's no going back, not unless the thread holds. It unspools softly behind you. Ariadne's gift, simple and clever. You run it gently through your fingers as you walk. Smooth, tense, alive somehow, like a heartbeat in silk. The sword in your other hand feels heavier than it should, like it knows what's coming. The labyrinth doesn't roar or creak. It doesn't feel haunted. It just is a place outside of time where the walls watch you but do nothing. Your footsteps echo but not far. The way ahead disappears around corners and into darkness, twisting back on itself in ways that feel impossible. It's not a puzzle. It's a trap that forgets it ever had an entrance. And somewhere in here, the Minotaur waits. Theseus is walking slowly now, alert but calm. His breath is measured. If he's afraid, he doesn't show it. But then again, heroes never do. That's part of the job. Mainstream fact. In most tellings, the confrontation between Theseus and the Minotaur is surprisingly short. The killing isn't described in detail.
No epic duel.
No monster monologue. Just he finds it. He fights it. He wins. But that's not how it feels when you're inside the maze, walking one echo at a time towards something you were never meant to face. So let's slow down. Theseus is not a god. He's a prince. Young. Mortal. His blade is iron, maybe bronze, nothing divine. His thread is just thread. The creature he hunts is bigger, stronger, and, some say, smarter. And the maze favors the one who's lived in it longest. Fringe scholars have all kinds of ideas about what the Minotaur really was. A lost prince raised in isolation. A symbolic guardian of sacred rituals. One fringe theory even claims the Minotaur was a misunderstood heir. A child of foreign blood hidden away to avoid dynastic scandal. Not a beast, but a brother. But here, in this version, he's something more ancient. The thing in the dark that doesn't need a reason to be feared. The punishment that outlived the crime. You walk with Theseus as he follows faint traces. Scratches in the wall, bits of bone, the smell of musk and damp fur. The air changes, thickens, the kind of silence that tells you you're no longer alone. Then you hear it. The hoof, just one. Then another. Not stomping, not galloping, just slow and deliberate, like a sentry making rounds in his kingdom of stone. Theseus freezes. You can almost hear his heart beating. Not heroic and steady, but loud, panicked, clumsy. He raises the sword, not with flair, not with glory, just the way anyone might lift a thing they hope they won't have to use. The Minotaur steps into the corridor ahead. A shape cut out of shadow. Massive. Horned. Not snarling. Not rushing. Just watching. This is the part where your imagination fills in the blanks. Because the myth doesn't tell us what the Minotaur says, if he says anything at all. It doesn't say what he feels. Whether he knows what this moment means. Whether he's tired. Or angry, or just hungry. Historians still argue whether the Minotaur wanted to kill, or if it simply became what it was told to be. After all, if you're locked away your whole life, fed only fear, what else would you grow into? Theseus doesn't talk either. He charges. The clash is brief. The sword cuts. The horn misses. The air fills with breath and effort and pain. The creature falls, maybe with a cry, maybe with a thud, maybe in silence. And just like that, it's over. The Minotaur is dead. That's what the myth says. But it doesn't feel victorious. Does it? Not when you imagine it. Not when you've walked this far in the dark. There's no music, no cheer. Just Theseus panting, gripping his sword, standing over something that never chose to be a monster. You stand there with him for a while, not sure what to do next, not celebrating, just processing. And then the thread tugs, still there, a lifeline. You take it, you follow it, back through the twisting corridors, back toward the light, toward Ariadne, toward a ship waiting at harbor. But the story feels different now. Not heroic, not tragic, just quiet. You don't forget the Minotaur's eyes, or the way the labyrinth seemed to breathe, or how the thread felt in your hand, fragile but enough to find your way out. The sea greets you again, soft, blue, indifferent. You step out of the stone mouth of the labyrinth, blinking into the sunlight like someone waking from a deep, confusing dream. It's too bright out here, too loud, and too alive. After the hush of stone corridors and slow hoofbeats, Theseus emerges with the others. Not all of them, in some versions. Some tributes may have gotten lost or caught along the way. The myth doesn't always bother to account for the details. It's mostly interested in the silhouette of a hero, sword in one hand, thread in the other. And beside him stands Ariadne. You'd think this would be a happy moment. Monster slain, people freed, the curse lifted. But Greek myths never give you clean exits, do they? There's always one more twist, one more mistake, one more uncomfortable truth folded into the aftertaste. Let's start with the escape. Theseus, Ariadne, and the surviving youths flee Crete under cover of night. They board a ship, likely the same one that brought them, and sail off before Minos can react. Some stories say Daedalus helped them again, opening doors and sabotaging guards. Others leave him behind, his own tragedy still unwinding in another tower. You picture the ship cutting through the Aegean, the waves licking at the hull like lazy fingers. Ariadne stands at the prow, wind in her hair, gaze fixed on a future she finally chose for herself. You want to feel hopeful for her. You really do. But there's a storm coming. Not from Poseidon, this time the disaster is entirely man-made. Mainstream fact. In the most common version of the myth, Theseus abandons Ariadne. Not in Athens, where her betrayal might make political waves. No, on a quiet, empty island called Naxos. Why? Good question. Some say he simply falls out of love. Others say the gods command it, specifically Dionysus, who claims Ariadne for himself and sends a dream to Theseus telling him to leave her behind. Some versions try to soften it, claiming Theseus departs while she's asleep, intending to return, but never does. Fringe interpretation, that Ariadne was never meant to leave Crete alive, and her journey was symbolic of feminine rebellion punished by myth. In other words, she got too smart, too bold, and too necessary to the hero's success. So the story trimmed her out at the next available stop. But let's imagine it happening slowly. Ariadne wakes to find the beach empty, the sails a speck on the horizon. No note, no reason, just a broken promise, carried away by the wind. And you, the dreamer, feel that sting, that twist in the gut, that reminder that in these myths, the monster isn't always the one with horns. Back on the ship, Theseus sails home. And here comes another classic Theseus moment. He forgets to raise the white sails. Remember the deal? If he survives, he's supposed to swap the black sails for white ones so his father, King Aegeus, will know he's alive. But Theseus is either too tired, too distracted, or too wrapped up in his own thoughts to remember. So when the ship approaches Athens with black sails still fluttering, Aegeus assumes the worst. He throws himself from a cliff into the sea below. That body of water? It becomes the Aegean Sea, named after a man who loved his son and made a split-second decision with no time for second thoughts. It's a lot. Theseus returns, victorious but alone.
No Ariadne.
No father. Just a city waiting to crown him king, whether he's ready or not. And what about Ariadne? In most versions, she's rescued by Dionysus, the god of wine and madness and wild freedom. He marries her, gifts her a crown of stars, and turns her heartbreak into immortality. It sounds romantic, doesn't it? A goddess instead of a queen, a party instead of a palace. But it still started with a betrayal, a thread cut too early. You sit with all of this now. The monster slain, the thread followed, the girl left behind, the sails forgotten, the sea renamed. Historians still argue whether the myth of Theseus was always this messy, or whether later authors added the heartbreak to balance out the heroism. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the myth isn't about victory. Maybe it's about cost. Every escape leaves something behind. You start to feel it now, that the labyrinth didn't end at the stone walls. It stretched beyond into the choices that followed, into the ship, into the silence of Ariadne's island. into the water below the cliff. The real maze was never the stone one. It's everything that came after. Now the story turns quieter, but no less tangled. The ship is docked. Theseus walks the streets of Athens, not as a prince anymore, but as a king in waiting. The crowd cheers. The city breathes. But something feels hollow, like a feast missing its salt. You think of that forgotten sail, how a single slip undid a father's life. You think of Ariadne, blinking in the sun on an empty beach. And you wonder, is this really the ending heroes are supposed to have? But let's stay with Theseus for a bit, because this part of the myth, the aftermath, is rarely told in full. Most stories drop the curtain after the Minotaur's death, as if the maze had erased everything before and nothing after could matter. But of course it does. Theseus returns to a kingdom in mourning. His father, Aegeus, is gone. The people want a new leader, and Theseus, fresh from his victory and mistakes, becomes king of Athens. Now, here's the thing about Theseus: he doesn't settle down. He doesn't become a peaceful ruler with a love of tax reform and nice sandals. No, Theseus continues to do what Theseus does best: act before thinking. He starts making alliances, fighting bandits, raiding neighboring lands. In some versions, he even joins up with Heracles for a bit of god-tier buddy comedy. Mainstream fact: Theseus is credited with uniting the small communities of Attica into one city-state, Athens proper. He also introduced some democratic reforms and founded festivals. In other words, he did good work. But in myth, his later years are anything but heroic. Let's talk about his relationships, because wow, this guy collects complicated women like they're limited edition amphory. After abandoning Ariadne, Theseus marries Phaedra, her sister. Yep, real classy. Phaedra becomes queen of Athens, and for a while, everything is fine. But the calm never lasts long in myth. Enter Hippolytus. He's Theseus' son from a previous affair. He gets around. And Phaedra, depending on the version, either falls in love with him against her will or is manipulated by the gods into doing so. It gets messy. She confesses her feelings. He rejects her. She accuses him of assault. Theseus believes her and curses his own son, who dies horribly in a chariot crash. Eventually, the truth comes out. Phaedra dies of grief or guilt or poison. And Theseus? He loses his son, his wife, and any chance at family peace. Fringe theory here. Some modern scholars read these events as moral allegories. Phaedra represents unchecked desire. Hippolytus, excessive virtue. Theseus, the human stuck between ideals and instincts. But let's be honest, it mostly just feels like the universe punishing everyone for trusting Greek men. You can't help but think, would things have turned out differently if Theseus had stayed with Ariadne? Maybe. Or maybe she would have ended up like everyone else, hurt by a hero who couldn't stop walking forward, even when he trampled the people behind him. And what about the Labyrinth? It's gone now, isn't it? Or is it? Because even though the maze itself doesn't feature in Theseus' later adventures, its shape follows him. Every choice he makes leads to another corridor, another dead end, another thread that snaps in his hand. Historians still argue whether Theseus was ever intended to be a noble figure. Some think he was a cautionary tale dressed as a champion. Others think his contradictions were the point, that he reflected the contradictions of Athens itself. Clever but careless, proud but fallible, heroic but only until you look too closely. And here's a quirky tidbit to round out your mental gallery of Theseus moments. In one obscure version of the myth, Theseus doesn't die in battle or old age. He's pushed off a cliff by the king of Skyros, who grows tired of hosting a restless has-been hero, just like his father. Full circle. You lie in bed now, blinking slowly, thoughts trailing like thread. The labyrinth may be behind you, but Theseus is still in it, somewhere. Not surrounded by stone this time, but by memory, by legacy, by the stories that refuse to resolve. You can almost hear him muttering about destiny and duty as he walks another corridor, another impossible turn, still swinging a sword, still forgetting the sails, still trying to be a hero. The thread is in your hand again. You feel it tug, and so you keep walking. The thread winds again, not forward this time, but sideways. It takes you back, past Theseus and the Minotaur and Ariadne's quiet island, back to something older, stranger, more forgotten. The culture that might have inspired the entire myth. You're walking now through not just myth but memory, or what's left of it. Let's talk about the Minoans. Before Athens rose and Sparta flexed and all the major players of classical Greece elbowed their way onto the historical stage, there was Crete. And long before the myth of the Minotaur was carved onto urns or whispered by poets, the Minoans were already building something mysterious. Mainstream fact: the Minoan civilization flourished from roughly 2600 to 1100 BCE, centered on Crete. They had writing, trade routes, big multi-story palace complexes with plumbing, and a real flair for frescoes. Their art is full of dolphins, lilies, women in flouncy skirts, and most famously, bulls. A lot of bulls. Which brings us to the key idea: bull leaping. This wasn't a one-off myth. It was a ritual, a sport, maybe even a religious act. In Minoan frescoes, figures are shown running at bulls, grabbing their horns, and flipping over their backs like gymnastic matadors. It looks insane. It might have been ceremonial, coming of age, or symbolic of seasonal renewal. Or it might have been exactly what it looks like: wild, dangerous bull stunts. Fringe theory. Some believe that the Minotaur myth is a distorted memory of bull leaping. That over generations, the rituals became stories, and the stories became monsters. What was once a sacred dance turned into a cautionary tale, especially from the perspective of mainland Greeks, who didn't understand what Crete was doing and probably didn't want to. And then there's the architecture. The palace at Knossos is sprawling. Rooms lead into rooms. Corridors twist and tangle. Some parts appear to double back on themselves. It's not hard to see how ancient visitors, unfamiliar with the layout, might have whispered, "This place is a maze." The word labyrinth itself may come from labris, a double-headed axe used in Minoan ritual and decoration. So, the labyrinth could originally have meant the house of the double axe, a sacred place, not a prison. But again, myth doesn't like nuance. By the time the Athenians got hold of the story, the house of sacred bulls and ceremonial dances became a dark maze with a man-eating monster. Politics? Probably. Cultural misunderstanding? Almost definitely. Historians still argue whether the Athenians invented the Minotaur myth entirely to demonize their Cretan rivals. Was it a smear campaign? A way to say, look how savage those people were? Maybe. Or maybe it was just a way to process something strange and ancient that no one could explain anymore. Let's not forget that Crete was hit hard by a volcanic eruption on nearby Thera, modern-day Santorini, followed by tsunamis, possible invasions, and eventual collapse. It all unraveled fast. And when cultures collapse, their rituals get repackaged into bedtime stories and monsters. Quirky tidbit. One Minoan fresco shows what some interpret as a priestess, holding snakes in both hands, flanked by a cat. Others say it's not a priestess but a goddess. Others say it's not snakes. It's breadsticks. Okay, not really, but close. That's how strange the remains of Minoan culture are. Colorful, fragmented, full of guesses. Now zoom out with me. Imagine you're an ancient Greek, 500 years after the fall of Minoan Crete. You find the ruins. You see the frescoes. You hear stories from sailors and survivors and the oral traditions passed down through fractured generations. There was a powerful queen. There were bulls. There were palaces and strange rites and a disaster so big it shook the sky. What do you do with that? You make a myth. You say there was a king named Minos. You say there was a half-man, half-bull locked in a maze. You say a hero came and slayed the beast and freed the people. You make it make sense, even when it doesn't. And now you lie there, tangled in your sheets like thread, thinking about how many myths are just misunderstandings that got too interesting to correct. Maybe that's what the labyrinth really is. A story you keep walking through because you're not sure where the truth ends and the dream begins. You don't need to solve it. Just keep following the path. Even if it's looping back to something you've already seen. Even if it's leading somewhere no one remembers anymore. The thread pulls again, but this time it winds inward, around the idea of the monster. You've seen the labyrinth. You've walked beside Theseus. You've even stood with Ariadne in that moment of betrayal. But what about the Minotaur? What about the creature at the center of it all? Let's just sit with him for a while. In most retellings, the Minotaur barely gets a sentence of description. Half man, half bull. Born of unnatural desire. Locked away. Slain. The end. But if you slow down, if you listen, you start to notice how quiet his side of the story is. Almost too quiet. Imagine being born into isolation. Not knowing why everyone looks at you with fear. Not understanding the language of those who feed you. Only knowing that your world begins and ends with stone corridors and flickering torchlight. Mainstream fact. In classical art, the Minotaur doesn't evolve much. He's always a hybrid, muscular body. Bull's head. A creature of brute force. But he's not always monstrous. Sometimes he looks tired, pensive, alone. Not a villain, a victim. You might start to wonder, did he even want to hurt anyone? The myths say yes. They say he devoured the tributes, tore through Athenian youths like a beast in a cage. But the myths also say he was the child of Pasiphae and raised in secret, that he was locked away not because of what he did, but because of what he was. Fringe interpretations go deeper. Maybe the Minotaur wasn't a monster at all. Maybe he was a metaphor for shame, for taboo, for the parts of ourselves we exile rather than face. Jungian psychologists eat this stuff for breakfast. To them, the Minotaur is the shadow self, the unacceptable truth buried in the maze of the mind. But even if you don't speak in symbols, the story starts to ache when you think about him differently. You imagine the Minotaur pacing the labyrinth, not stalking, just moving, because there's nowhere else to go. No windows, no sun, just darkness and stale air and a silence that hums so loud it feels like company. You picture him aging. No one mentions that, but surely he does. Even monsters grow older, maybe slower, maybe sadder, maybe smarter. And then one day, the footsteps echo. Not guards, not food, something else, someone different. A young man with a sword and a thread. Theseus. Historians still argue whether the Minotaur had a name. The myth never gives him one. Minotaur just means bull of Minos. A title, not a person, but in some later versions he's called Asterion. Little star. Think about that. Asterion. Not beast, not freak. Just a boy given a name that no one used. You don't hear it carved into the walls. You don't hear the Athenians say it. But maybe his mother whispered it once. Long ago, before the door closed behind him forever. You wonder what the last moment looked like. The clash with Theseus. The blade. The fall. Was there a fight? Or a pause? Did he recognize what was happening? Did he want it to end? These are questions the myth avoids. Because the Minotaur was made to be slain. That was his purpose. That was his shape. But in sleep the shapes shift. The story softens. You start to think about how many monsters you've been told to fear who were just misunderstood or misnamed. You walk a little further in your dream, imagining what might have happened if someone had given the Minotaur something other than a prison. If someone had spoken his name, Asterion. You say it softly to yourself. Doesn't sound like a roar. It sounds like a lullaby. And here's a quirky fact to file away into the folds of your half-conscious mind. There was a real Cretan god named Asterios, associated with the stars, sometimes confused with Zeus, sometimes not. The name meant something to ancient people long before it was handed to a creature behind stone walls. Maybe, just maybe, the Minotaur was never meant to be a villain. Just a mirror. A mirror you weren't supposed to look into too long. But tonight you do. You see him. And for a moment, the labyrinth doesn't feel like a prison anymore. Feels like a place of waiting. A place where stories pause until someone's ready to listen. And you are. So you take the thread gently and begin to walk back, leaving behind a creature who was never really a creature at all. Just a name. Just a boy. Just a shadow waiting for light. The thread now winds through softer corridors, still within the maze, but deeper in its heart, where the walls start to blur and the myths begin to talk to each other. You're still in the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, yes, but echoes of other stories begin to rise like distant music. Because Greek myths never exist alone. They're part of a web, a pantheon of tangled threads. Tonight, you tug gently on one of those threads. Let's talk about labyrinths, not just the one in Crete, but the idea of the labyrinth itself. Mainstream fact: labyrinths appear in myths and art far beyond Greece. In ancient Egypt, for example, Herodotus described a giant stone labyrinth, real, supposedly with thousands of rooms, columns, and chambers, near the city of Crocodilopolis. Yes, that was its actual name. Historians still debate whether he exaggerated or just misunderstood what he saw. Either way, the labyrinth was a real concept long before Minos and his monster. And in even older cultures, spirals, knots, and coils appear as sacred symbols. Not always traps, sometimes journeys, sometimes meditations. The difference between a labyrinth and a maze has choices. Forks, dead ends. A labyrinth has one path, a winding single road that leads you to the center, and then back out again. So maybe Daedalus didn't build a trap. Maybe he built a ritual, something the walker wasn't supposed to escape from, but transform through. Fringe thinkers see it that way. They argue that the myth of the Minotaur was once an initiation tale. A symbolic descent into darkness, where the young man meets his fear, slays it, and returns to the surface, changed, older, wiser, branded by experience. Theseus wasn't just escaping death. He was being reborn. And the Minotaur? Maybe he wasn't a real enemy. Maybe he was the thing that had to die in Theseus so something else could live. You're feeling that now, aren't you? that the labyrinth isn't made of stone. It's made of story, and you're walking it second person, step by step, not to escape but to understand. There's a strange comfort in that. You think of other stories that mirror this descent and return. Orpheus descending into the underworld, Persephone taken by Hades, even Odysseus wandering for 10 long years, always searching for home, always carrying a bit of the maze inside him. All of them leave, all of them return, but none of them come back the same. Even Ariadne, she began as a princess, she ends as a goddess. She was the threadbearer, the guide, the helper, roles often shoved to the edges of male-centered myths. And yet, without her, the story falls apart. Theseus would still be wandering. The Minotaur would still be waiting. Historians still argue whether Ariadne was once a far older goddess figure, demoted by later patriarchal versions of the myth. Her association with mazes, with the moon, with thread and fate, suggest more than just a mortal girl with a crush. She might have been the original weaver, like the Moirai, the Fates, controlling the pattern that gods and men walked upon. Ariadne as fate, Ariadne as center. You feel it now, that the real center of the labyrinth wasn't the Minotaur. It was her. And so you spiral inward, not just to defeat a monster, but to meet the one who holds the thread. Your breath slows, your thoughts drift. The thread becomes softer in your hand, warm and familiar. You feel yourself inside a story, but also outside it, watching from above, tracing the pattern. There's no panic, no fear, just gentle movement. Left, right, turn again, deeper. And in the quiet, you start to wonder, what if the Minotaur was never meant to be killed? What if you were never meant to leave? What if the center was the only place you were ever supposed to find? It doesn't matter. The story moves anyway. Theseus walks out. But you might stay here a while longer. Not trapped, just still. You're still walking, not forward anymore, not even backward, but in slow circles now, like a spiral seashell held to your ear. You begin to feel that the story has folded in on itself so many times that it's no longer a straight line. It's a coil, a loop, a labyrinth of thought. And tonight, the path turns once again to Daedalus. Yes, the builder, the brain behind the maze, the one who made everything possible, and yet never truly escaped anything at all. Let's go back to him. Mainstream fact: Daedalus wasn't just some mythic architect. He was Athens' most brilliant inventor before relocating to Crete. He created statues that moved, tools that bent the rules of nature, and maybe, just maybe, the world's first glider, depending on how far you're willing to stretch the myth. But for all his genius, he made choices. And one of them was building the labyrinth. Was it just a job? Was he ordered? Or did he build it to hide something he couldn't face? Something that shouldn't have been made in the first place? Remember, it was Daedalus who helped Persephone fulfill her unnatural desire. It was Daedalus who crafted the wooden cow. And it was Daedalus who designed the prison to contain the result. Fringe theory. Some interpretations suggest Daedalus didn't build the labyrinth for Minos at all. Instead, it was a symbolic punishment, a creative man trapped by his own brilliance, a metaphor for being too clever, too willing to serve power. The labyrinth wasn't just his invention, it was his mirror, and eventually he fell into it. Not literally, Daedalus was too careful for that, but he did end up a prisoner on Crete, along with his son Icarus.
No exit. No escape.
No freedom. The maze outside reflected the maze inside, until he made wings, the wax and feather variety, light, delicate, impossible, a creation born of desperation. the escape attempt that everyone remembers. Here's the version you know. Daedalus tells Icarus not to fly too high or too low. The sun will melt the wax. The sea will soak the feathers. Stick to the middle path, he says. And of course, Icarus doesn't listen, because whoever does in these stories, he flies too high. The sun melts the wax. He falls into the sea. His name, forever attached to the warning. Don't reach too far. Don't try too much. Don't aim for the gods. Historians still argue whether this part of the myth was added later, as a moral lesson. A warning tale for ambitious youth, or for artists, or maybe for fathers, or maybe it's just about flying. But tonight it doesn't feel like a warning. Feels like a dream. You imagine Icarus in that final moment. Wind in his hair, sky all around. Not afraid, not sorry, just free. For one glorious second, no labyrinth.
No minos. No monster.
Just the air and the thrill of rising. And Daedalus? He survives. That's the part we always forget. He lands safely in Sicily, builds temples, tells his story, grieves. But you wonder, was he ever really free? After all, the man who designed the labyrinth never truly left it behind. It lives in his thoughts, in every flight of invention, in every twist of grief. Maybe that's the cost of brilliance. You build something so clever, so impossible, that even you can't find the way out. Quirky tidbit for you. In one version, Daedalus marks each door of the labyrinth with chalk to remember his path, only to discover Minos has done the same, leaving false signs to trap him further. So cleverness meets cleverness, and the maze adapts to defeat even its maker. You start to feel the thread again now, brushing softly between your fingers. It doesn't pull this time. It waits, like it knows you've come far, but you're not quite ready to go. You breathe in. The air smells faintly of beeswax and feathers. The wind whispers like old wings. You're still in the maze. But maybe that's all right. Maybe the goal was never to leave it. Maybe it's not even a prison anymore. Maybe it's just a shape your mind takes when it wants to rest. You walk slower now, lighter. You pass old doorways. Daedalus' fingerprints are still on the walls. Icarus' feathers drift like snow in the distance. The Minotaur's breath has faded. Ariadne's thread hums like a lullaby. And somewhere above, the sky waits, not to burn you, but to welcome you. The walls are thinner now, not in the sense of crumbling bricks or open doors, but in the way that dreams blur the edges of thoughts. You've walked so far, followed so many threads, through Theseus, Ariadne, the Minotaur, Daedalus, even the echoes of gods, and now the labyrinth doesn't feel like stone at all. Feels like memory, a place not built by hands but by stories. And stories, as you've learned, always carry weight. Let's turn now to what the myth has meant to others, how it's been used, reused, reimagined. Because the tale of the Minotaur and the labyrinth didn't end with the ancient Greeks. It never does. A good myth folds itself into every generation's needs. It shows up in poems, in paintings, in quiet metaphors whispered at midnight. Mainstream fact: the Minotaur has appeared in everything from Renaissance art to 20th century novels. Writers like Jorge Luis Borges gave him new voice, a creature not snarling in shadows, but pondering his own existence. In Borges' The House of Asterion, the Minotaur narrates the tale himself, describing his solitude not as punishment, but as normal. The twist? He doesn't know he's a monster. He doesn't know he's waiting to die. And it's haunting, because suddenly you see yourself in him. That's the thing myths do when they're old enough. They start reflecting not just gods or monsters, but you. The Minotaur becomes depression, or isolation, or the side of you you don't show anyone. The labyrinth becomes the mind, or grief, or bureaucracy if you're having a particularly bad week. And the thread is whatever holds you together when everything else twists. A memory, a voice, a routine, promise, a friend. Fringe readings of the myth take it even further, suggesting that the labyrinth isn't a place you escape, but a cycle you return to. That the point isn't slaying the monster, but recognizing it, accepting it, walking with it, because you can't kill what's part of you, but you can understand it. Think about how often you revisit the same loops in life. Patterns, habits, fears. The myths weren't wrong. They just didn't have podcasts or therapy back then. Historians still argue whether the Minotaur was meant to be a cautionary tale or a moral lesson. Was it about unnatural sin, failed power, the dangers of cleverness without compassion? Or was it just a story to tell restless children in a flickering firelight? Maybe it's all of those. Maybe that's why it survives. Quirky fact: the French architect and philosopher Apollonius, in one story, claimed he could build 3 types of structures: those that are mute, those that speak, and those that sing. The labyrinth, if he had built it, would have sung. A low, looping song, full of echoes and turns and whispers you can't quite catch. You think about that as you walk, how the labyrinth sings softly behind everything in life. How even in the most mundane days, traffic jams, spilled coffee, forgotten passwords, you sometimes feel like you're in a maze. You turn a corner and find something unexpected. You double back. You lose the thread. You tie a new one. The myth lives there, too. And now you're nearly at the center again. But it's not what you thought it would be. There's no glowing treasure.
No altar. No beast.
Just stillness. The sound of your own breath. The echo of every step you've taken to get here. It's quiet. Not empty. Not sad. Just full. Full of story. Full of names. Full of you. The thread doesn't tug now. It loops softly around your wrist. Not to lead you anywhere. Just to remind you you're still connected. To Ariadne. To Asterion. To Daedalus. To all the versions of yourself you've met along the way. And the exit? It will come. But not yet. For now you sit. At the center of the labyrinth. At the center of the myth. At the center of yourself. And the walls around you hum with everything you've learned. You're still in the labyrinth, but now it feels like you've reached the quietest room of all. The one without monsters, without heroes, without thread. Just stillness. The journey has coiled so tightly that time feels paused, and all that's left is the soft echo of breath. And yet, the story has one last turn. One last stone to lift. You've walked through the myth of the Minotaur, followed Theseus, mourned Ariadne, soared with Daedalus, listened to the silence of Asterion. But what is the myth, really? What was it trying to teach? And why does it stay with us thousands of years later? Let's unroll the thread one last time. Mainstream fact: myths weren't just entertainment in ancient Greece. They were teaching tools. They explained natural phenomena, preserved cultural memory, and passed down values. But they also left space for contradiction. Theseus is both hero and cautionary tale. The Minotaur is both beast and victim. Ariadne is both savior and abandoned. Nothing is simple. Even the gods, immortal, powerful, untouchable, are tangled in jealousy, passion, vanity, and vengeance. The myths reflect us. not as we should be, but as we are. And the labyrinth? That might be the greatest metaphor ever crafted. A place you enter to face what you fear. A place where logic dissolves and instinct rules. A place that looks like a trap but ends up being a mirror. Fringe readings call it a psychic structure, the human mind wrapped in memory and instinct, or a political allegory, the complexity of power, punishment, and inherited violence, or even a story about storytelling itself. How we get lost in narrative, looping through familiar plots, retelling the same tales until we find a version that finally feels true. You wonder now if anyone actually believed in a real minotaur. Maybe they did. Maybe some thought it lived under the palace at Knossos, bellowing into the dark. Or maybe they knew, even then, that monsters are mostly metaphor, and that every monster wears a human face, twisted not by horns, but by loneliness. Historians still argue whether the myth was meant to glorify Athens or demonize Crete, whether the Minotaur was a punishment from Poseidon or a punishment from men. But the debates don't really matter anymore, because the story survives. And so do you. Quirky tidbit to carry with you. The Romans loved this myth too, but they often flipped the tone. In some mosaics, the labyrinth is treated almost like a fun puzzle, and Theseus is just another party guest with a sword. The Minotaur? Less horror, more spectacle. Less symbol, more circus act. It's strange, isn't it? How stories change shape depending on who's telling them. Same maze, different map. And now here you are, in the dark, still, quiet. But you're not alone, because somewhere someone else is lying in bed, listening, walking this same path with you. Different time zone, different thread, same story. That's the secret the myth never tells you. The labyrinth was never meant to be walked alone. And now, gently, the walls begin to breathe. The thread curls back toward the entrance. Not a tug, not a command. Just a suggestion. The way morning starts to seep into a dream. The way you know it's almost time to wake up. But not yet. Not quite yet. There's one more moment here. One more breath. One more long, slow look at the winding halls you've walked. You've seen heroes fail. You've seen monsters mourn. You've seen brilliance build prisons. You've seen thread turned into salvation. And now you carry all of it with you. The labyrinth isn't gone. It's just in you now. You'll see it again. In difficult choices. In unanswered questions. In those late-night thoughts that circle back to where they began. In the part of your mind that holds every story you've ever been told. You smile, maybe. The Minotaur smiles back. Not scary. Not tragic. Just there, waiting, for the next dreamer, for the next step, for the next thread. Now the path softens. You're stepping gently now, like your feet aren't quite touching the ground. The walls of the labyrinth dissolve, and the echo of old stories begins to fade. You've walked far, deeper than most ever go, and now it's time to rest. You've seen how myths twist, how meaning stretches, how even a monster can carry a name like Asterion, little star. You've followed a thread spun by a girl who was too clever for her own good. You've held the silence of a maze that reflects the mind. And you've walked out again, not unscathed, but awake. Even as your breath slows, the thread remains in your hand, not to guide you, but to comfort you. A reminder that you're not lost. You're just dreaming. So let yourself sink now. Let the story wrap around you like a blanket made of old parchment and soft sea winds. Let the lights dim behind your eyelids. There is no minotaur waiting, no monster to slay, just you, resting at the center of something ancient and kind. The labyrinth can wait. Tomorrow the thread will still be there. But tonight you drift, thread in hand, eyes closed, heart calm. The story is done. You are safe. You are still. You are home.